Above, we find a design already seen at Kala Caves, the Gavaksha. Like Kala's great Chaitya, the arch here still frames a real opening, preserving the memory of earlier wooden architecture. But already, across the facade, smaller Gavaksha motifs appear purely as decoration. We are witnessing a transition before our eyes. What began as part of a practical system was gradually becoming a sacred decorative language in its own right. Again, we see a barrel vaulted roof lined with timber beams. Unlike Kala, none here are believed to be original, but later restorations. By restoring the wood that time erased, the caves continue their dialogue with the past, just as those who created these halls once intended. The stupa here is smooth, the result of several factors, but ritual activity likely played a role as well. Generations of human presence, movement, and touch may have gradually polished parts of the surface over time, leaving behind a physical trace of long human devotion. These columns lean slightly inward, a detail often interpreted as the continuation of an earlier timber building technique where inward tilting helped support the structure. Stone architecture no longer needed to behave this way, and somewhere between Bhaja and Kala, the columns were straightened. Notice their simplicity, plain octagonal shafts with no elaborate capitals. At Bhaja, none of that existed yet. The builders were still thinking like carpenters, not yet like stone architects. Unlike Kala, these Viharas are accessible for us to explore today. Notice how this section imitates wooden railings. Like most Viharas of early Buddhism, they were practical, disciplined, and repetitive in design. Some of these Viharas are thought to be among the oldest rock-cut caves in Western India. Notice this carving here. Even after centuries of erosion, we can still recognize a human figure carved into the stone. Its exact identity is uncertain now, perhaps a guardian, musician, dancer, or warrior, but it reminds us that these caves were once far more visually alive than they appear today. These were not primitive caves. They are old, simple in appearance, but not unsophisticated. They rise across multiple levels. Their orientation towards the sun appears deliberate rather than accidental. And decoration, although restrained and not yet narrative in the way later Buddhist sites would become, is still present. Down here, we can see a later addition to the site, a stone shivlin associated with Hindu worship. This is important because it shows the site continued to be used long after its original excavation. It was not simply carved and abandoned. Communities returned here for centuries. Here we see stone beds where monks would have slept, simple rooms for rest and little else. The stone platforms were likely covered with simple mats, cloth bedding, blankets, or cushions made from perishable materials such as cotton, woven reeds, grass, or animal skins. We can see here where a section of the floor has fallen away. The original access point to these caves no longer survives. Here, even more rooms, places to sleep, meditate, and shelter during the monsoon months. If you look closely at Badger's walls and ceilings, you can see chisel marks, millions of chips caused by human hands striking stone with tools. But we should not imagine the site exactly as it appears today. Badger was most likely once coloured, plastered, decorated, and combined with wooden structures that no longer survive. Much like Kala and Kanheri, the site we explored yesterday, this place was never truly discovered because it was never truly lost. There was never a period when it ceased to be used, visited, or remembered. We have already seen evidence of that here through the presence of the shivling. This is remarkable in itself because many historic places survive only because they were forgotten. Once abandoned, they disappear from human attention long enough to escape destruction, rebuilding, quarrying, or reuse. Tomorrow, at Ajanta, we will see an example of this, a site that fell into relative isolation for centuries, helping preserve some of the most extraordinary surviving paintings in the ancient world. Bhaja survived differently. It endured through continuous human presence across different religions, cultures, and centuries. Now, let's imagine these spaces as they would have been during a monsoon retreat more than 2,000 years ago, this time from a monk's perspective. When Vasa commenced, a period of almost constant rainfall, the Western Ghats transformed into a landscape of mist, waterfalls, mud, and dense green vegetation. Powerful downfalls could arrive suddenly and last for hours, sometimes so heavily that conversation became difficult beneath the sound of rain striking stone. The air would have been cool and damp, wind moving through entrances, sandals scraping stone floors, quiet conversations in Pakrat, chanting from the Chaitya hall, carrying faintly through the complex. Privacy would have been limited. These were communal religious spaces, not individual homes. Some cells may have used cloth partitions or hanging coverings for modesty or warmth, although very little organic material survives to prove exactly how interiors were arranged. At night, oil lamps would have provided small pools of flickering light inside certain areas. We can still see blackened sections today on some ceilings and walls, likely caused by long-term lamp usage. Some caves may have held stored goods, water jars, tools, manuscripts, or offerings. Meals were simple, but food would still have been prepared and shared collectively, often supported through donations connected to the trade routes below. Traders would arrive from time to time, seeking shelter from the rains, resting here briefly alongside the monks before continuing their journeys. And perhaps most importantly, Bhaja would not have felt ancient to the people living here. It would have felt alive, functional, important. When it came to passing time, a monk's life here would have been structured around repetition, discipline, and communal routine. Senior monks instructed younger novices, discussed doctrine, debated interpretations, and memorized large bodies of oral tradition. In early Buddhism, memorization was crucial. Entire teachings could be preserved through collective recitation in an age before widespread written manuscripts. Hours may have been spent each day chanting teachings aloud within these halls. At other times, monks would have cleared caves, maintained lamps, collected and stored water, repaired clothing, prepared simple meals, cared for guests or traveling monks, and maintained the wider monastic complex itself. But despite the spiritual atmosphere, these were still human communities. People talked, shared stories from journeys, discussed politics, trade routes, kings, famines, weather, and news arriving from distant regions through travelling merchants. Here we find a rare example of an inscription at Bhaja. Unlike later cave complexes, where donor inscriptions became increasingly formalized and widespread, Bhaja preserves relatively little written evidence. And yet, even this faint carving reminds us that these caves were not anonymous spaces. Real people passed through here, leaving fragments of themselves behind in the stone. Here, we encounter something different. A group of 14 rock-cut stupas standing together beside the monastery. These are not ordinary architectural features. They are memorial stupas connected to monks and teachers associated with Bhaja itself. In Buddhist tradition, stupas were not only symbols of the Buddha, but could also commemorate important religious figures after death. Some may once have contained relics, ashes, or other funerary remains connected to the individuals they honoured. Several inscriptions survive here, preserving the names of elders once connected to this monastery. And this changes how we see Bhaja. Until now, it is easy to think of these caves as archaeology, anonymous stone structures surviving from a distant age, even after trying to imagine the people who once lived within them. But here, individuals emerge from the rock itself. Real monks who once lived here, taught here, died here, and more than 2,000 years later, fragments of their names still survive. Like everything else at Bhaja, these stupas were not constructed and placed here. They were carved directly from the living rock itself. If you look towards the back, you can see how the excavation was gradually pushed deeper into the hillside as additional stupas were created over time. You might be wondering what these square structures above the stupas are, something we've now been seeing across the past 2 episodes. It is known as the Harmika, and once again, its origins reach back further than rock-cut architecture. As we know, stupas were once burial mounds, raised over relics or important individuals. And these mounds were often enclosed by wooden railings, separating ritually protected space from the ordinary world. Over time, as stupas evolved from burial monuments into increasingly symbolic sacred structures, so too did their enclosures. Here, the railing that once surrounded the mound has itself been symbolically elevated above it in the form of the Harmika. In this final section, we encounter some of the earliest surviving carvings at Bhaja, a rare glimpse into Buddhist visual culture before later artistic traditions fully developed. One famous relief here has often been identified as Surya, the solar deity riding in a chariot alongside Indra riding the elephant Airavata. Other scholars have connected these scenes to Jataka tales, stories of the Buddha's previous lives, or to mythological and symbolic forces connected to Mara and the spiritual struggles surrounding enlightenment. Part of what makes these carvings so fascinating is precisely this ambiguity. We are looking at Buddhist art from a period when imagery was still evolving, before the Buddha himself was commonly represented in human form.